Indigenous 201. My name is Jeffrey Baker, and I'm going to talk to you today about my presentation, which is on the Maori people of New Zealand and how, really importantly, they were able to get legal personhood for the Whanganui River. And what I'd like to talk to you about today, in summary, is a little bit about the history of New Zealand and the colonial history of how the interactions between the Crown and the Maori affected the country. I'd like to talk to you about the river itself and how it gained legal personhood. And then I'd like to finish with talking about how this might be possible for Canada to implement some of these same things to help our Indigenous people. I've included a little bit of some audio-visual things that I edited. Bear with me, I've never done it before, but I just wanted to give you something to see visually as well as the pictures and the PowerPoint. So I hope you enjoy, and I'm going to switch over into my PowerPoint.
So, my presentation is the Whanganui River, New Zealand, and the Maori. So first off, the country. It has a population of just over 5 million people. It has a geography of 103,000 square miles, and it's comprised of two main islands, the North and South Island, and a number of small islands around it. Its capital is Wellington, and the largest city is Auckland, which some of you might know. Its food dishes that it's famous for is the hangi, which is a Maori dish, and they cook with a lot of crayfish, lamb, and seafood just because they're an island nation. The official languages are English, Maori, and New Zealand Sign Language. And some of the cultural things of interest are the Maori tattoo, which is called moko, rugby, traditional carved redwood house architecture, and some of their famous dances are the haka and the poi, which some of you may have seen. They're represented in a lot of different media. And so I just want to show you a quick little video that shows off the culture and the country.
What we do is we cook our food under the ground, and it's cooked with river rocks. We heat them, and the steam from the river rocks, they put in about a 1 metre hole, and then we place the food over the rocks, and then the steam cooks for about 3 hours, and this is some of the foods that we can steam.
That's what makes it so unique. Like today, I had an idea in mind, but then as soon as I saw her back, it changed just like that, and it looks totally different to what I was going to initially do.
So that was a little bit of cultural interaction, and now we're going to move into colonial interaction. So just like in Canada, there was a colonial interaction between the British and Maori historically. The Maori people lived next to the Whanganui River for over 700 years before this interaction began. During European discovery of New Zealand, which occurred in 1642 with the arrival of Abel Tasman, who's shown in this picture, then further contact was extended in 1769 when James Cook mapped much of the coastline. The settlers, similar to Canada, wanted to move into this territory and build farms and houses, but most of the settlers did not understand the Maori land tenure process and the Maori law concepts, which were very different from the British colonial institutions. So how are the Maori treated in New Zealand? Well, a lot better than Canada. Even initially, the behavior was quite good, and treaties were signed together in good faith with mostly understanding on both sides. October 28, 1835, Busby organized a meeting at Waitangi, where 34 of the chiefs signed the Declaration of Independence of New Zealand. And then later on, almost 500 chiefs has signed on, including 13 women. There is one sole treaty which rules over all of New Zealand, which is the Treaty of Waitangi, which is they call the founding document of 1840. So, colonial breakdown. Just like in Canada, things broke down after a while after they signed these treaties. The treatment, after several decades of signing the treaties, broke down, and it occurred mostly over the resources and the Whanganui River. In 1883, the iwi attempted to prevent the Crown from development upon the Whanganui River, claiming that it violated their treaty rights to be stewards of the river. Through arrests and threats, the Crowns forced the iwi to abandon these attempts, and they launched further legal battles for the same issue over 24 years from 1938, and they eventually lost in 1962 in the colonial courts. So, the river itself, the Whanganui River. So, there's a really famous saying in New Zealand, which is, "I am the river and the river is me," and I won't try and pronounce that because I can't. And it is the slogan of the Maori people. So historically, the river has been linked to the people, and this is an ancestral connection to the river. The river starts at the Tongariro National Park near three volcanoes, the Rawehu, the Tongariro, and the Ngaraho. It then carves through two national parks, a national forest, a lot of farmland, and finally two large towns where it empties into the Tasman Sea. So I just wanted to show you a quick video on that.
Surrounding us is unspoiled native forest, and it's just immaculate. Welcome to Whakaharu.
This is the Whanganui journey. It's a 3-day river journey down 146 kilometres of beautiful New Zealand river.
We've got a big Canadian canoe here, and we're going to cruise down this river over the next 2 or 3 days and see what it's all about.
So he did a little bit better job of pronouncing that, but I am the river and the river is me. So let's just talk about some river stats. So it has a length of 180 miles or 290 kilometers. It has a flora which is broadleaf and podocarp forest with a variety of ferns and shrubs like you saw in the video. And some of its fauna include the famous blue duck and the Nankeen heron, flounder, trout, and lamprey fish populations of note. And a lot of people do fishing on this river, including the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So, the modern treatment of the river. The iwi are the stewards of the river, just like many Indigenous people around the world, and they have continued to fight against the government and industry misuse of their waterways as per the treaty rights. The factors leading to the river's protection started with continual legal battles across hundreds of years over ignoring the original treaty rights, polluting of the river through farming and forestry dams, which actually made the river sick with runoff from industry, according to the iwi, who were charged to protect the river for perpetuity. Legal personhood had previously granted to corporations, trusts, joint ventures, and nation states in New Zealand, but nothing had ever come over for the river or anything of natural. This expansion of personhood to the river was as a result of a very long and hard legal struggle between the Whanganui and the colonial control over their river, which we talked about a little bit. So, the rights of the river. So, the 1975 was an important year because there was a tribunal, the Waitangi Tribunal, set up to handle the outstanding claims that arose from New Zealand's treaty, the Treaty of Waitangi that we talked about. The tribunals were explored the inalienable connection between the river and its people. The tribunal met people on their own lands, and it heard testimony about what they wanted to talk about in their own language, and it allowed them to vent the abuse that had happened in the past. The tribunal ruled that the land was not a tradable or disposable item. It was entailed to the tribe's future generations. So this is sort of similar to what we've heard in a lot of the things in our class already. So in 1995, the Whanganui River Report was published to consolidate all these findings. It was really similar to RCAP and the discussions around our reconciliation. In 2001 to 2005, the government heard 3 cases of the report discussed in their parliament. And in 2014, the Ruruko Wakataupai set out a settlement deed which recognized the Whanganui River as a legal entity and set the stage for 2017 ruling. So basically what that means is it said that the river was a living person, so that it had protected rights. And on March 20th, 2017, the New Zealand government formalized this historic legislation, recognizing the Whanganui River as a legal person holding rights and responsibilities equivalent to a person. And that is called the Te Arurura Act, which is the Whanganui River Claims Settlement Act. So, the Whanganui River legislation, it enshrined pre-existing relationships of the Maori to the river. It grants legal rights to the natural entities to protection against polluting and overuse from farming and industry, like we talked about. And it models a practice that reflects and respects Indigenous ways of knowing. So it's the same in Canada. We have the Indigenous ways of knowing, and they do as well. The Te Arurura Act in 2014 declared the river as an indivisible and living whole from the mountains to the sea, holding the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. So just like they had corporations like this, now they have rivers. It creates a governing body to act as the human face to the river to advise and support in the exercise of its function. It acknowledges the rights of the iwi to maintain the health and the well-being of the river based on their pre-colonial government system, which was called the tikanga. Legislation included financial compensation and apology from the Crown for damage caused to the river and its people. It's kind of similar to what happened in Canada over the last few years. And upon passing of this legislation, the iwi were in attendance at Parliament and they celebrated with a waiata, which is a traditional Māori song of celebration. And I just wanted to show you that clip because it's quite exciting.
The New Zealand Parliament has passed a bill recognizing the Whanganui River as a living entity with the same legal rights as a person.
Tribes in the area fought with the government for recognition of its relationship with the river since the 1870s. The Whanganui River will be granted its own legal identity as an individual.
Got it. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Te Awa Tupua Whanganui River Claim Settlement Bill, third reading.
So that's quite special. So the impacts of the new law and activism. So you can see there's a picture of the Te Arurura National Park. And in 2014, using the same larger legal framework established, the famous national park here was given personhood. So that was just after they ruled on the river. They actually used the same legislation to rule for this national park. And then shortly after that, the Mount Taranaki was given personhood as well. So the council has started to prosecute now farming, forestry, and runoff that is harming the river's health as a result of the legislation because it's a person and it's being hurt. And new legal cases against the government for water degradation into their ancestral water bodies are now being had in court. So the river is often contaminated now with fecal bacteria and sediment from farming operations, which are being prosecuted. And the council, which is the head of the river, like they said, the face of the river, is investigating Genesis Energy, which provides 4% of all New Zealand's power through hydropower, because it is currently taking away 75% to use as dam water, and it only returns 15% safely. So they're actually being prosecuted. Therefore, the iwi have once again become stewards of the land, and they are offering consequences for industry and corporations who attempt to do harm and degrade their rivers. So, the Māori activism, can it apply to Canada, which is the big question? So here below is the Wet'suwet'en protesters in last year, just at the end of last year. And what the Maori did was they used public perception towards climate change and water land to shift the ideas in New Zealand to give that case a win. So the government did what the people wanted. Could this become a way to resolve our Canadian legal battles? Well, that is a really good question. is the New Zealand legal paradigm transferable to Canada, where we could use that legal precedence to win similar cases over our pipeline oil spills, like in BC? So legal precedence often doesn't consider other countries' cases as legally binding, and we've seen that in UNDRIP internationally, and it's the same with the Maori. They rather use it as a form of discussion during the court cases to use as examples. So all in all, the wins offer some proof of a solution that can be held up during our legal battles, along with other international legislation like UNDRIP. So here's another picture of the protests. So what I found is the Maori Party in New Zealand supports the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and they have pushed that declaration into the modern media and public perception, and that has really helped switch over people into understanding the river and to get back to nature. So they stated that we need to make the declaration meaningful to build solutions and policies around how we can ensure that we are meeting the obligations and then test and measure our performance against it. And that's really important because there's consequences for the actions of industry now. And I believe that our NDP party could equally push forward a similar public perception change and hold the Liberal government accountable for using this river's personhood and the United Nations Declaration as an international precedence to move forward our legal standing. As the Supreme Court sides with Indigenous people, and it seems to be that the government will not move forward without any kind of public interest. So as long as they don't have anyone pushing them, they're not going to do it. So this could actually help. So the Whanganui Settlement and the Te Arura Act could become the beginning of a new legal movement, foundations for both incorporating Indigenous legal systems into the Crown and evolving Canadian legal systems to reflect a less colonial worldview. Therefore, I hope this research may inspire and offer insight into how we can use these same mechanisms to protect our land and waterways. And I just have my references here for the videos and for the written, and then a little goodbye video. So thank you for watching.